It's my first time being on a podcast, so this is something I've always wanted to do.
Well, thanks for coming, man. Yeah, so, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Logical Shaman podcast. I'm Zach, and today I have a special guest, a Facebook friend of mine that I'm getting to know in real life, Shawn Saul. Welcome, Shawn Saul. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, Zach. Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited to be on a podcast for the first time.
Yeah, bro. It sounds like you definitely had some similar points of interest to me as far as like philosophy and music. I know you have a long history with music, so I'm definitely curious to pick your brain about that.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. Yeah, I definitely feel the cross mutual interest between music, philosophy, spirituality, graphic novels.
Oh, yeah, we found that out when you came in today and saw my collection.
I'm so impressed, just for all you viewers out there. No, he has such a sick, amazing library, and it's all organized, color-coded, alphabetically.
Semi-organized.
Look,
it looks good enough.
I mean, look, he's hiding a very amazing visual display, and we're both really big Alan Moore junkie level fans. So
yes,
super nerding hard on that right now.
Because when I tell people I'm into comic books, like I'm really into Alan Moore, and then I'm into other comics secondarily.
Right.
To Alan Moore.
No, exactly. When you get to Alan Moore, it becomes apparent how much everything is sort of measured from Alan Moore. He becomes his own stick.
And yeah, maybe this is blasphemy, but he's kind of become my favorite like author, even in like books. Like he puts so much thought into characterization, and he does like, if you ever looked into Alan Moore, he does like reams and reams of research on any book before he even if it's like the most obscure, like, well, he did From Hell, which was about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah.
And literally like the back fourth of that book is all his documentation of all the notes and research he did into
on
the time
Victorian
period.
England, everything.
Like how people talked, like the different stratas of society. He goes into so much detail. So
and that's and that's what we were saying when you were telling me how your favorite Alan Moore graphic novel was V for Vendetta.
And it's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh, League for Extraordinary Gentlemen. But nonetheless, if you take V for Vendetta, for any one of you guys or for anyone out there who's read or hasn't read it,
that's also a good book.
It's amazing, but there's so much Scottish and British English dialect that's written. The transliterations are written out,
Mm-hmm.
And we as Americans, if you read this, it's not always easy to understand. But it just
you have to like say it out loud in a Scottish accent to get what they're saying.
You really do, mate.
No, exactly. He even does in From Hell. He does the Elephant Man. Like Jack the Ripper is a doctor in that book, so he goes to like visit the Elephant Man.
John Merrick.
And he can hardly talk because he's all deformed, and he writes out how it would sound, and it is really hard to understand what he's saying.
Dude, yeah. I mean, have you ever seen the old Elephant Man black and white movie?
I don't think so.
Oh man, you gotta see that just for the imagery.
When was it made?
I think it was made maybe in the early 50s.
Is it actual like film of the Elephant Man, or is it a fictional?
It's a fictional remake, but it's so accurate to the few pictures of the Elephant Man that are actually real that it's really sad and fascinating all at the same time. And it's actually really interesting. I think it's worth noting how Alan Moore makes so many cameos of characters throughout history. And it's kind of like, if you look at a Beatles album like Sgt. Pepper's, you see all the little memes, all the cultural references. And, a lot of people don't know that John Constantine was just a meme in Swamp Thing.
It came from Swamp Thing.
Yeah. In his whole quirky character, it's really interesting how that interacted with Swamp Thing, who's an elemental, and how John Constantine, he's kind of an interesting guy because he's like this dude who's like, yeah, I'm enlightened, but I don't really give a shit.
Yeah.
Fuck off.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting sort
he really
of
just
character.
don't give a fuck. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And he's always being threatened by like demons or vampires or these like incredibly powerful things, but he's just unfazed, and it really bothers all of these creatures that are trying to scare him and manipulate him. He's just like, yeah, whatever, mate. Like, what? Okay, I'm gonna go have a spot of tea.
Yeah, it's the British whimsicalness mixed with the with like the god level nihilism that just like it confuses all the supernatural deities. It's like, what are you? Are you afraid?
That's a powerful tool, like especially for like little kids who, you know, traditionally comic books have been geared towards, but like, you know, they're like, especially for me when I was a kid, I was scared of so many things. Like, especially when I try and sleep at night, I just start thinking of all the scary stuff I'd seen on TV or thinking about demons or aliens. And if you can like kind of train yourself to embody that type of caricature or archetype of like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, you're out there, but I'm cool. You know, like you can't faze me. You know, really, it can help you overcome like some of those fears and things.
It really can, and it makes you realize how the traditional characterization of the hero archetype has been kind of like, let's say in the 20th century onwards, kind of like watered down into this campy thing. You look at the old Adam West Batman and how it kind of started off.
Good example.
And you know, he's just some fucking playboy dude who looks hungover. It looks like he's just a Will Ferrell character.
Yeah, actually,
you know, like a comedy.
Will Ferrell as old Batman, like the old school. Oh my God. That would be amazing.
That would really be amazing. Yeah, but...
No, I see what you're saying. But they make it seem silly and campy.
It's very campy, and I think in the 80s when Frank Miller... you know, revamped it, and we saw The Dark Knight Returns, and we saw a more mature, grim, cynical, dark, evolved, mature version. It really was more appropriate to the reality of our times, you know, in our culture, where, you know, whether, you know, you look at your parents or you look at anyone who was supposed to be an authority figure or role model probably weren't perfect. Right, so this idea...
A lot of disillusionment.
Right, you know, so to see someone like John Constantine that ends up helping people and he's in this certain state of understanding truth, but he doesn't have to pretend like he's the shit, he doesn't have to prove anything, and he doesn't also have to suppress emotion. It's okay, like, if he's hungover, if he doesn't feel good, he speaks his mind. And there's a type of courage in that sort of characterization that honestly we actually need more. You know, so it's but yeah, I think that whole Alan Moore, Frank Miller, you know, once the graphic novel thing really kicked off, you know, it's like we were saying earlier, think about how much of that has influenced modern superhero movies.
Oh, definitely.
The cinematic adaptations are totally based and influenced by
modern, a lot of modern culture in general, like video games and movies and TV. Like, there's been a shift, especially since the 80s, to a darker, grittier, more realistic. And I think that's definitely in there. Like, if you go back to read Watchmen or you go back and read The Dark Knight Returns. But I think they're missing it. Like, I think that's just surface level. Like, make it darker, make it grittier. I think really what they were trying to do, like Alan Moore and Frank Miller, they wanted to make it more human. It wasn't just that it was darker and grittier. It was like, no, like, if Gotham City was a real place and Batman was dealing with these crazy psychos, what would that do to his psyche? And what would that do to a man that was able to stand up to these sort of evils? What would he be like? So, and I don't think it was just done to be dark and gritty and edgy, although maybe it became that, like a caricature of itself. But it was more about, you know, like, where's the humanity in this story, and how do these archetypes like feel more realistic and feel more grounded?
And I think from that perspective, like maybe we can say that the superhero universe reached this existential maturity that was needed to really ground it so that we can relate from that interpersonal psychological level. That it's really cool, you know, how within philosophy and psychology, we have the language to really get deeper into those inner subjective states. And there's actually, you know, both a poetic and philosophical and scientific way of talking about it. And to go beyond bang, bang, ooh, bad guy shot.
When I think
Scooby-Doo-esque sort of, to go from that to that, think about how the whole medium of superheroes have evolved.
I think it's tied into our culture as a whole. Like one of the big topics you wanted to talk about was God, and I see how this kind of connects, because I think that superheroes were becoming really popular right when scientism and science was becoming dominant in our culture, and religion was sort of getting phased out, and we had like the world wars and all these horrible events that like disillusioned people. And so like these archetypes, because superheroes are really just like an archetype. You can take it back to like Greek mythology.
I was about to say, so the pantheon of the gods is really sublimated, reincarnated, we can say, as superheroes.
100%.
So tied.
And I think it was like shoved away into like children's literature, like the comic books, because people weren't taking it seriously. They were like, oh, this is just a silly archetype. This is not serious like the real world, like World War II, like having to make it during the Great Depression. Like, you go read your silly stories about archetypes and things like that, because I don't have time for it. So I think it was made silly kind of by the culture as a whole, but it like survived in this like subculture of children's literature, because kids would still be into that sort of stuff.
And what's funny is that actually, on a side note, because for all the people out there, I mean, I don't know, the age demographic of your viewers, but for a bunch of dudes in their, early 30s, we could arguably say that went all the way up to the 90s. I mean, in the golden age of, so many, even as a teacher, I have students that...
You teach music, right? Is that...
Yeah. I teach music, and I had a student with a Nickelodeon jacket and had Rocko's Modern Life and the Real Monsters.
Oh yeah, I remember those.
And the Rugrats, and I was like, dude, that's a badass jacket. He's like, Mr. Shawn, man, I think the cartoons you guys had in the 90s, that was like the peak, the golden age. And I was like, dude, thank you so much, because let's think about it. Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life, dude, this stuff had some really psychedelic, deep, existential...
I was going to say existential stuff, yeah.
Let's say borderline even like some David Lynchian surrealism.
It was.
Like we had lodged into children programming existential, surrealist, psychedelic mementos psychologically that were planted, that for sure, I think growing up doing podcasting, do this thing, you can't deny, dude, like that time period we came from, all the crazy, even on, remember WB, like the Animaniacs, or...
Oh yeah,
like
Animaniacs were great.
Or even Freakazoid.
Yep. Freakazoid runs around in underwear.
Dun, dun, dun,
yeah.
Dun. I mean,
and that stuff's embedded in my brain now forever.
It is, or All Real Monsters. Yep. There was this oddity in this really strange, quirky, dark, unique character that I think opened up what they started. That humanizing, showing their emotions.
Yeah, they were almost humanizing the cartoon characters. They did. Like the silly after school specials got real.
and I remember always being a fan of Hey Arnold, because dude, his parents were dead. He was openly depressed.
True.
And he was sophisticated. He was kind of emotionally detached. He didn't understand things, but he kept his cool. And that was so...
And they had the grain of, like, morality in that show, too. He was trying to do right and, like, trying to do the best he could and making mistakes, but there was, like, a moral through line to it.
And it kind of showed before social, political narratives started to really divide people, how... actually culturally open. I mean, look at the neighborhood, look at all the diversity, look how everyone came together. And it's so funny how it was like a party that I think, like what I call them, the little Zoomies, Gen Z.
Okay, what is that, the like under 20s? What is
I think
I don't know the exact delineation.
Right. Yeah, because Gen Z is definitely below us as millennials, and then the Zoomie culture, I think even whatever's below that, those kids are tapped into the Zoomie culture, and the Zoomers, the Gen Zs, you see all their TikTok culture, and a lot of it is trying to fetishize 90s culture. So they claim they hate the millennials, but really they secretly admire, the fact that all those like really cool humanizations of like what we loved about, the graphic novels. I think the end of it was in those 90s cartoons.
That makes sense to me.
Right. And then
then it kind of went downhill.
It did. And then you
well, like you said, it was already open and it was already accepting, and we already, loved other cultures, probably more than any other, I don't know any other, but most other civilizations on Earth. Like America loved other cultures and splicing different types of people together, and that's what the kids grew up on at that time. Yeah. We didn't care what color you were or what your culture was. If you were a nice person, we were going to hang out with you and be friends. And it was like after that, it became more of a fake version of that. Like we have to force this in and make it this thing. Other than I feel like it had already reached that point where.
Yeah, I know. They couldn't just like ride the wave and just like enjoy the fact that the quote unquote progress actually did get to a point where, hey, like everything in the 90s, man, was this sense of celebration and partying and like we're cool and it's okay to be present and happy.
Yeah.
And there's this existential displacement. And I think we were lucky that, so much of those superheroes that we got that humanized take on them. But as we were saying, now maybe the new generation, Star Wars and the new animations, it's kind of just becoming a little slapsticky, maybe just a little visually sensational. So maybe
and a little freakier. I mean, they're always pushing that boundary, especially like on Adult Swim and stuff. I feel like now they're just trying to shock you. There's not much more content there.
Right. And I think it's like what we were saying, how like in the early days of cinema, right, slapstick and stuff, like that was cool and funny because you had drama, you had sci-fi, you had this big variety. But today,
because back then people were reading books mostly. That was like the dominant culture was books and newspaper. And then you'd go watch a movie as like let's just chill out for a minute and watch this silly production where a train like comes at the screen and we freak out.
Yeah.
It was much simpler back then, and it was more of an accent to the overall culture than like now film and TV is like the dominant like culture. Like that's the way people.
Right. And because it's a medium, it's a form language, it keeps conveying the same archetype, the same message. And that's how it gets watered down because actually, in a sort of psychological Jungian sense, all these different archetypes where, kind of like how horror movies, psychologically from science studies, the reason we like them is because we get to simulate fear without being in danger.
Exactly.
So we get to learn from them unconsciously, and it actually makes us better prepared to confront danger. Because unconsciously, we've seen it and we know, okay, alligator zigzag, like...
We were hypothesizing, we talked about this on Crossing the Chasm, if you guys want to check it out, our other podcast.
Cool. Yeah.
But we were theorizing that, like, probably one of the main reasons that, like, horror is so popular and, like so many women become obsessed with like serial killers and things like this.
Yeah, why is that?
We were thinking it has to do with just because, kind of like what you were saying, it ties into that. Like we're used to that adrenaline rush of being in the wild and being chased by animals and having this danger. So like biologically, we're missing something. Like it's not even necessarily a good thing. We're used to having this around and having this. To it. Yeah, and that probably was tied into how we would exercise more and be healthier because we were chasing and running. So people are like chasing after that fear like response because it's just naturally a part of what we are used to, and we don't have it anymore.
You are tapping into something so deep, man. I couldn't agree more. And it makes me think about my cat and how it's always honing its claws, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's always honing its instincts.
Yeah.
And it needing to...
Talk about zoomers. Cat love to zoom around your house like you're getting ready for a fight.
No, dude, definitely. And, they got to keep their shit on lock already.
Yeah.
And it's almost like in a weird way, we got that inner killer that needs to be prepared in case the danger comes. So these movies are like this safe Freudian sublimination,
Yeah.
so that we can unconsciously get the feeling of encountering it. But holy shit, the way that ties into how psychopaths become the romantic male archetype
Oh, weird.
for attraction, and how our culture plays with this idea.
Because they're more tapped into the animalistic side or
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah. Because, you know, human sexuality is so tied to our human instincts that anything that acts as a key to open that shit up,
Right.
we're
exciting.
We're a hormonal box looking for keys to be opened up.
True, right.
And it's kind of crazy how, you know, the movies really romanticize that sort of fantasized vulnerability.
Yeah. Well, what's like the most popular women's book and movie like ever the past decade? Was the what's it called? The not Black and White. It's the oh man, I guess I'll have to edit this.
Yeah. No,
oh man, what is this called?
yeah,
Where the rich guy like dominates this woman.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on what it's called.
No.
now.
I'm blanking on what it's called.
Wait, I have to look this up.
Yeah, you
Hold
got to
on.
look this up because it's not Grey's Anatomy.
No, it's something to do with the color. Oh yeah, gray. No, you're right. It's something gray. Popular movie.
Dorian something?
No, Dorian Gray is another book. Let's see, popular movie.
I know
Gray,
exactly, and
chicks. Can I find it?
and he's like a sadomasochistic abuser who's really charming.
Whoops, Gray.
He's a charming sadomasochist.
Yes, that's exactly what he is. Hold on.
And that's
This is killing me. I gotta find this. 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh my God.
So yeah, that reminds me of 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, that's what it is. It's the rich power male fantasy of the guy who dominates a woman, and he's a psychopath. Like he has no emotion and no care for her.
And I think it's funny because as men, that could be like such an ultimate litmus test, you know, in terms of like, you know, like, hey, like that 50 Shades of Grey, like kind of stay away from that shit because you know what it really is it's romanticizing the idea of like unresolved trauma and like using like the lover as a way of like sexually like opening that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really toxic. Yeah, I think it is like undealt with trauma, and you're kind of like you said, romanticizing instead of dealing with it and understanding it. You're just like getting off on it and not really like and
to tie I have a perfect analogy to tie us back into the superhero universe is Poison Ivy. Because think exactly that. What is Poison Ivy? What does she actually represent? But the idea of being enamored by the seduction. And so it really kind of shows that in a way, like that challenge to see like, hey, try to come get me, but I won't allow you to get me, but ultimately I want you.
Right.
So there's like this violence.
And that's her power over
that's-
men, is their desire for her.
But they say we have to chase the woman and then they run away.
Yeah.
So, you know, the 50 Shades of Grey is that there's 50 puffs of Poison Ivy juice, bro.
No, completely. It also I couldn't help but think, if we're going back to comics, was in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Alan Moore really explores that side of humanity with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, the whole
definitely.
duality of the, like, animal side of man and the, like, tame, you know, male energy versus the, like, unrestrained, like, male energy. And how
Right.
much you need that, like, wild animal. And that wild animal is a part of all of us.
It is.
You know, and in some sense, we all want to have access to that to, like, protect ourselves and protect our family.
Yeah.
But, like, at the same time, it can terrify people and ourselves and women and,
Right.
you know, things like that.
And it can ultimately be self-destructive because it's ultimately when we unlock our secret weapon. We can't point it at ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and I think also, you know, tying this back to another metaphor, Frank Miller, the Dark Knight, the Dark Night of the soul.
Oh, yeah.
Is really it's unlocking that animal, which really, if we want to take fans back to the deeper symbolism and mystical archetypes of Game of Thrones, what is the dragon? Slaying the dragon, unleashing. Why is the dragon caged? Why does it want to be freed? Because that's really our inner animal.
Yeah.
And when, what's her face? Princess, help me on this shit. I'm not a
Princess who? Wait, what is this?
Slayer of Dragons.
I'm not sure.
Okay, but you know what I'm talking about with the blonde white hair.
I've lost the thread of what character we were talking about.
The queen in Game of Thrones who rides the dragons.
I know you're talking. I'm not into Game of Thrones. I don't know. It's like Cersei or Ciri or something.
Right,
like that.
but think about it. She becomes.
I know you're talking about now.
She was a slave to her brother and was passive and was treated like shit.
Right.
And then when she became the Dragon Queen, she was able to, claim the throne of.
When she unleashed that
dragon.
Wild side, yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So, and that's what also the idea of the Wolfman, coming alive at midnight.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting for fans maybe to take our discussion on some of these deeper archetypes and symbols and, rewatch all these scary movies, a lot of these, and you'll start to realize.
Well, there's almost always that undertone of sexual attract, even going back to Dracula, of course, and who had sexual powers. And, and even what was the lagoon monster, that the famous
Creatures from the Black Lagoon.
There was a sexual undertone there where he was chasing the woman and they were reflected in the just to finish off what I was saying too about Dr. Jekyll, that's what they kind of go into in that story, because that also ties in with Dracula, because the character Mina in that book survived Dracula and had been through this horrible experience, basically dealing with the most evil monster that could ever exist.
Right.
And so how she deals with Mr. Hyde when he's transformed into the monster is very different than other people. And there's a moment in the second book where they are hiding out in this house and they have this quiet moment together where he's I notice how you are compared to the others. You don't look at me with the same fear and disgust. And he's I think you've probably been through some shit, basically. He's have you met someone that's worse than me? And she's basically just yeah. She's I'm through with it. She's I am afraid of you, but I just I've come to terms with that. And he's well, I know, he's I'm not stupid. He's I may be a monster, but I'm not a moron. He's I know that I could never have a woman like you or be with a woman like you, but he's it somehow makes me happy just knowing that in all the world, you're not afraid of me, basically.
Wow.
You're the one person that's not afraid of me. And he basically cuts her off at that point. And so after I said that, get the fuck out here before I break your jaw, and threatens her again with his animal nature. But he has that moment with her where he feels he's connected with someone for the first time. It always gets me. It gets me emotional.
Dude, and what's really profound about that is that you have the idea from the girl's perspective of the acceptance. Once you unleash your inner animal, you get the acceptance, and once you get the acceptance, there's this catharsis, and and actually you have strength, because strength doesn't mean the absence of the fear. It just means confronting. That's
overcoming.
Yeah, it means being able to stand in the presence of it. And what's interesting is in a sort of figure 8, a sort of dialectical inversion for Dracula, or for the monster, he gets to integrate his inner human.
Right. Find his humanity again.
So when we accept our inner monster and we confront monsters, we give them the space for inner healing. But in the end, it's still an individual choice. So that's why it's almost maybe as we tie this maybe to more God stuff, in Hinduism, we talk about the idea of Shakti.
Yeah, I think we should do that for sure.
The energy of God. And in that moment, that girl is transmitting this cathartic energy that he's able to feel. But because you have to do it for yourself, he ultimately couldn't integrate it. But he gets a mirror of what his truth could be.
Of what's possible.
But he didn't do it for himself. So that's the catch-22 about confronting the divine, is if you have to kind of be the magician, you have to conjure it, because if you just happen to be around the fire, you see the light, but the light will burn you if you get too close, because you didn't start the fire. You don't know how to control the flame.
Yeah, that's why it's got to be a balance. It can't be one or the other, the animal nature, but you have to integrate them both. Like
you do,
or you're missing a big part of the picture,
dude. And I think, dude, wow, really, this ties exactly into the whole theme in the name of your show, the Logical Shaman, because the Logical Shaman, really, I think for our generation, is really the perfect metaphor for how we integrate this, right? The shaman is one with the irrational world of nature, our animal spirits,
and the archetypes,
all the
ideas, and
and there's no limit. There's pure integration, and then reason is being able to discern truth from fiction. You know, being able to operate on categories of higher thought and
no, I completely agree, because even like when I say shaman, I don't mean that as an endorsement that I necessarily think that there is a spiritual world, but that shaman, like, historically was someone that would like surf the idea space. He would like feel out the culture. We were talking earlier about reality tunnels, and something that
good point.
Robert Anton Wilson talked about was basically everyone, like your brain acts as a filter for the world, and depending on how you're filtering it, you're seeing the world through a different reality tunnel. There's a Christian reality tunnel. There's a public school teacher reality tunnel. There's an atheist,
Hindu.
Everything, and you could have multiple reality tunnels depending on what you're talking about. But most people generally are kind of automatically in a tunnel without even realizing it, because they're just used to translating the world a certain way. But shamans can sort of jump through different reality tunnels, and they kind of see the bigger picture of like, this isn't like literal necessarily, or this is just one way of looking at it, and they can kind of jump through the concepts. And the concepts have power and meaning because everyone is existing in these different reality tunnels, dealing with different archetypes, that it does have effect on the real world, even though it's fantasy or it's imagination or whatever.
And they can understand the energy of every reality tunnel and what makes it have its own inner structure. And you're making me think about the anthropomorphic nature of consciousness, and how if you think about like a computer, for instance, you open up a internet window and you have a single tab. But think about how multiple tabs can be opened up.
Yeah, I've got way too many tabs
open up. And at the moment, think about all the different tabs you have open up are like different thought streams.
Right.
Different thought tunnels.
That's what they are.
And, the ability to be in this quantum unified multiverse space that can surf all of them allows you to be in reality, in the totality, rather than getting lost in the part. Right. Because now we get this idea of the macro, micro,
Didn't Jung talk about that too? Like the, what did he call it? The whole idea sphere, or the
collective unconscious?
The collective unconscious.
Yes.
That's what I think of as the same thing.
Definitely. Within the collective unconscious, we have the entire collection of human archetypes. And what's really profound is that at that level, you could say that every human being has a pre-programmed software. And that maybe what Plato was calling the world of ideas and forms, was really the collective unconscious, and all the archetypes, to be a hero, to be a villain, to be a father, to be a mother, to be the jokester, to be the healer. All these are in our collective unconscious. And this is what allows us to really unconsciously do all this role play where, here we're doing podcasting, you go pick up food and you're a customer, a patron of a food establishment.
Playing different roles.
And there's different form languages. They ask you certain pieces of information. There's certain rituals, how you stand, give them the money. It's all a shamanic ritual in a Jungian sense that's very it's a collective chaos where, certain sociologists have talked about how we evolved towards a collective schizoidal illusion. That you could actually say that our awareness...
We're sort of hallucinating the society together.
We are, because the initial confrontation of self-awareness with the fact that we're mortal and we're going to die, and that there's nothing within thought or awareness that stops this. Right. So the paradox of being given this awareness to something that awareness alone doesn't...
That's existentialism right there.
Yeah. Why are we given awareness to something that awareness can't change?
Right.
What is the purpose of life?
Yeah, and you don't want to feel defeated by it. But,
you don't.
Right? It's hard. I mean...
It very much is. So we invent culture as a way of being able to transcend and overcome the fact that we would have probably nihilistically died out.
Yeah, or just bashed each other's heads in if we didn't come up with this way to deal with each other and get along and like, it's, to me it's like it is the solution to violence. Like it's really beautiful. Like, you can say what you want about like modern society and say it sucks in certain ways, and I'd probably agree with you, but what we're doing as a culture or as like humanity is a beautiful, and it's amazing that we can act on this level and that we can say mouth sounds at each other instead of just beating each other up, and raping each other and stealing stuff. And like, no, we'd rather play this game that mutually benefits us and enriches us instead of taking and stealing and burning and,
right.
All this stuff.
And I'll have to get back to you. Maybe there's this Israeli historian named Yuval Harari.
I've heard the name. Okay.
And he has written some really, really amazing books that talk about basically how did we go from being these insignificant ape-like humanoids in the savannah to, world domination, and what is that story of how we...
Yeah.
And it's actually the story of how stories itself creates a shared collective consciousness that allows for human organization.
There you go.
And what he's saying is that if you look at other species, you can look at bees, for instance, and they can have mass organization, but there's no flexibility in the roles.
Yeah.
So each category of each
binary.
type of... Right. It's completely binary. And if you took monkeys, for instance, that have certain levels of flexibility, if you put... He says if you took, as a thought experiment for fans, it's funny, imagine seeing a whole bunch of monkeys in a football stadium. And what would happen? And they would fucking kill each other. They would go insane. It would be the most...
They would go ape.
They would go ape shit, literally. And think about what happens if you put a whole bunch of human apes in a arena. We get sports. We get organization. And I think that's
true.
In the end,
And even from an early age, that's like, I don't know if you've watched any Jordan Peterson, but he talks
definitely.
a lot about like how play and children and games, and like how children will come up with rules, even if they don't know how to exactly explain them, or maybe they're not all completely agreed upon, but all the kids make enough agreement to like participate and all have fun. And they're not just, it's not completely random. Like there's thought and there's rules and boundaries that get set up in whatever game that kids, are playing. And it's like built into us almost to want to do that, to organize. And
it is. And I think that, because I don't know how much more time we have, and I kind of like want to talk a little bit.
We got time.
Just for people to know a little bit, I'd like to talk a little bit about my background, just my views on spirituality, because this idea that you're describing from Jordan Peterson about how, little kids, before we're controlled, before we're programmed, we're naturally creators.
Yeah.
We are system builders. We are archetypes. You know, if you think about within the esoteric occult, even organizations like the Freemasons, right? Why is there this symbolism to building, to the architect,
structure,
to the mason, to structure?
Yeah.
And how is it that that's tied to some notion of human divinity? And then let's take that to this Jungian level of childhood and what's happening, and we're being builders. We are being builders of the universe.
Yeah.
We are being the creator God, creating the rules, creating the systems, and implementing it. And in a Platonic sense, no one taught us that. So where did that come from? Somehow we tapped into a immediate access of this collective unconsciousness that might be something that makes us realize that once we come into human existence, there's a cloud. That you could say that consciousness is almost like a Wi-Fi cloud, and that the moment we're born, we're tapped into this, and this is what allows children to do things that they've never been learned.
It could be. I've always been skeptical of the Wi-Fi theory. I think it has more to do with like how brain structure itself like works. It may create similar structures or thought patterns, but I think by children learning like by watching us interact and by watching humans do certain patterns, it's sort of like going back to like the Jungian, the collective unconscious. To me, it's not like a literal like I couldn't go to sleep and dream, and we would literally share the exact same dream like through brain Wi-Fi. I don't think. Maybe we can. I haven't seen the evidence for it, but I think that because the ideas are all logically connected in our brains, they have a similar structure. So, for instance, if I'm thinking of space travel, because of when I was born and the media that I took in, I'm going to associate things like Star Trek and Star Wars and Apollo missions. Space travel, the idea is physically attached to these other concepts, and they branch out from there in a logical pattern, like in our brain structure. So although I don't think that there's literally like a Wi-Fi pattern that we share, although I could be wrong, I think it has more to do with how our brains structure information and how that is similarly shared between us because of our shared culture and our shared like understanding, our similar reality tunnels.
No, definitely.
That makes sense.
Definitely, and I think it's a hard thing to say to what extent this is emerging from our brains, or how much of this metaphysically or cosmologically is
I can't
just
say 100%.
Right? No. But I think it's worth saying, just for me to kind of explain the idea of where that comes from.
Please.
Is that, okay, in a conversation, for instance, you have your reality, I have my reality, you have your brain, I have my brain, and your brain and my brain are independently coming to our own thoughts and our own our own perceptions. But what is this medium? Is it the space in between your lips and my lips? What is it that allows us to both be in our minds and then transmute to the space and physical and back into your mind, such that
to me that's the evidence that there is a shared reality.
Yeah,
we are both existing in reality with our own perceptions of it.
You see how there has to be some sort of natural container ecosystem.
They call that a priori, I guess. You have to assume that there's something.
There's some.
Or else there would be no reason to doing this at all, because there would be no one at home to like watch it. There'd be no one.
Exactly. So think about how we're in physical space, but we're also in the Wi-Fi structure of our brain.
Yeah,
and
it's literally like, and I've used this example before, but it's literally like virtual reality. So you put on, it's like our brains are creating a virtual reality for us.
But we share that.
Reality.
Yeah.
No, we share reality, but then we all have our individual version that we're actually, because none of us actually experience reality. Like straight up, we're all experiencing a translation of reality
representation
by our brain, which is creating, through your sense input, it's literally generating a holographic representation, which is what you are experiencing right now. If you're watching this video, your brain is processing the video and the sound and your environment around you and how warm or cold your skin is. And it's making you feel like you are right there, because you are. And your brain is processing this information, and it's generating a full, like, it is like a VR video game that's being generated by your brain but it's based on a shared reality. It's based on the inputs of your body and like what's around you. And
but think about how we share language. You know,
yes, yeah,
we share the same conventions and rules and structures of speaking. You know, it's almost as if we share similar amplifiers, neurological amplifiers.
And that's why culture is so important, because we relate so much more to people that see the world similarly or have the same language or have the same.
Yeah, and I'm curious from your perspective.
Yeah.
If we can agree, you know, on this metaphor of our neurological brain structures as, you know, as these like amplifiers that can download information, is culture or the world a shared reality that we're both downloading from? Is that
wait? Say that again. Is culture what?
Is culture or reality some? I'm trying, you know, because we have this internal reality, the virtual reality that's happening inside the amp.
Yeah.
The you know, the brain amp, but the information that it's downloading it from, it seems that we have a shared source.
Yes.
Kind of like air.
Yes.
Or space.
The shared reality that we're existing in.
What is the shared reality that all of our brain receivers download from that allow us to agree on stopping at a red light?
That's what is.
Speaking meaningfully.
That's just what is.
And
or as God would say, it's what I am. It's
right.
Is.
But then that brings, okay, so then this brings me to what I'd like to get a little heavier on, is what, you know, in philosophy we'd call a pantheistic or an immanent conception of God versus a, you know, theistic transcendental conception, right, where for certain religious beliefs, God is outside the universe. So we live in a godless universe. And this is so paradoxical.
What religion would say that, do you think?
Christianity.
Is that Christianity? Because, I mean, Christians say God's in the universe as well, or is a part of the universe.
Well, God's essence.
Yeah.
But God himself, see, this is where you get into...
It would depend on what theologian you were talking to, probably, yeah. Or denomination.
Because I started recently, you know...
What do you think? Like, what do you think is...
Well, what I personally... okay, so what I think, and what's interesting, if you go on Netflix and watch the show about Rasputin and the Romanov dynasty, which was the last imperial family of Russia.
Yeah, that's a crazy story.
Dude, it's an amazing show because it shows the roots of the Industrial Revolution, the October Revolution, the rise of communism, of that revolution.
Right, that's true.
Rasputin was actually a consultant to the king.
Yeah,
of
like
the
an
Roman
advisor.
Right, he was an advisor during World War I, and Eastern Orthodox Russian Christianity is actually super cool. And this is something that through like getting into like mystical Russian...
Are those the ones that they like chant the Bible and stuff, and it's all like sung?
They do,
like,
and they
I
have
love that stuff.
Dude, and they have...
I've been to those churches before.
Yeah, they have this form of
art.
Yeah, and they have these Russian bass singers that sing this like gnarly ass fucking low Gregorian style chanting. That's amazing. But a lot of people don't know about Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and you see they have their own pope, and you see their big thing on why they don't agree with Catholicism, which in many ways is very similar to the Protestant theology, is because they think that you need God's energy.
Like to exist?
So to be a Christian, to actually be in it's actually interesting. It's not enough to have faith. You actually have to have a mystical connection
That's
to
like
God's
the Holy
energy.
Spirit, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying the Holy Spirit.
But it's kind of more of like a science. Like you have to become the mystic. And so this is where the cult of Sophia and the Divine Mother and Mary.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, so, you know, if you look into ancient religions, you're going to see a whole bunch of, you know, Gaia and feminine worship, which just goes back to fertility cults and Mother Nature. And the idea, as you were saying, is that God, and then if you want to say, okay, that God is beyond the universe, but his energy is here, that's panentheism. You see, pantheism just is saying that everything is God.
God is in
There
all
is no
things.
difference between God and the universe.
Yeah.
And there's somewhat of like an immediate agreeability that I personally think's kind of undeniable, that, you know, let's say if you're an atheist or a believer or anything, if we are going to share reality, it's going to be shared on some sort of mystical cosmological nowness. That I think what pantheism is saying is that let's just take here and right now and call that reality or God. And to me, that seems like really like, that makes a lot of sense. You know, we're dealing with the right here, right now, all the time. So whether God...
Yeah, if I was going to believe in God, it would just be that God is truth, you know, or God is what is, like...
Right, so that truth...
Or the totality, you know, I guess.
And that truth of what is has to be knowable and present to us right now.
Yeah.
So in a way, pantheism is a very nice, philosophically, scientifically, rationally compatible view system of God that kind of takes the whole mystery of like, okay, really explain this. If God isn't in our universe, then how did God create it then? And if God, let's say this, if God created it the way the Hindus or the Eastern Orthodox or most of the ancient polytheistic cultures believed, if God created this, then the entire fucking world's spiritual.
Right.
Dude, the entire...
Because it all comes of God's essence.
Right. So everything that God created is part of his essence. So God's essence in the creation is equal to the to his being, and this is what we call the unity of the unmanifest and the manifest, like in Taoism and
that ties into like Hinduism and
exactly
Buddhism as well, like realizing that you are God and God is everything.
God is everything.
And,
and it's both the that we both.
I definitely had that psychological trip at some point on LSD. That was quite an experience.
Dude, that's amazing.
Ego death and all that is very scary. Like
it is.
I
man.
wouldn't necessarily say you have to go through it, but it's definitely an experience. And it wasn't necessarily fun at the time, but I'm glad that I had that experience.
It's nothing. It's never something you plan for. It's never something you want.
You can't really control it. Yeah, you can't like make yourself have that kind of experience.
But the type of wrestling with having to accept being present for it is honestly, man, from doing a lot of soul searching, a lot of therapy, a lot of mentorships, basically the essence, to tell everyone in my opinion, is just fucking be present with your pain. And if you can do that without judging it, it's like a metaphysical fire that like burns out. And what you realize
honesty
is that
it's like true honesty with yourself.
That's what confronting your fear means, is just, you know, in Hinduism, we call this self-inquiry. And basically you sit with yourself and you try to understand what you're not. So everything that appears to you, by being a neutral observer, you start to realize you're
like
not your
thoughts. And
right.
Exactly, yeah.
And then this idea of the nothingness, the unmanifest, this starts to make, dude, even on a deep level, the whole, and people like, man, like for instance, I tripped when I was 17 and found the Bhagavad Gita in a hotel.
Nice.
So, dude, I read the Gita on acid.
I read some of that too. Wow, not on acid, but I read.
And reading the Gita on acid is really, especially with a lot of the artwork that was depicting things. Yeah. Because my whole thing is, when I was tripping, I realized that the state of consciousness this gave you access to was exactly what the fucking Gita was talking about.
It really is. Yeah.
It fucking tripped it tripped the trip.
Yeah.
Because I realized that book was tripping.
It's like hyper self-awareness.
Yeah. It's like
just existence.
This book is describing what the acid, the state of what acid gives you, a psychedelic fast pass.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Imagine that you're so used to going to the Disney fast pass lane, and then Disney shuts down,
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh yeah, you want
Yeah.
Disney? Well, you want to help work for
Well, and
Disney?
there's other things attached to drugs as well, which is just like the dopamine high and if, for instance, if you were abused as a child, you know, that you can become addicted to these things easier and abuse them because it makes you feel normal, like for the first time. If you're coming from an abused background where you don't feel like normal levels of dopamine or happiness.
It's a chemical
and
stabilizer.
Depression,
that compensates.
And so you can chase that, you know, beyond the psychedelic effects are almost separate from just the high or the like good, generic good feeling that you get from a lot of drugs. But there's definitely like an alteration of your mind that can help you. I think of it as being attached to like the Garden of Eden story and like self-awareness.
Yeah.
Like man becoming self-aware and sort of having the fall. Like that was the fall in Genesis, was self-awareness, because we weren't just like the beasts of the field anymore that could just enjoy existence and just be. You know, like every cat just is, every cow is just being a cow.
Oh.
But then man like became self-aware and kind of screwed ourselves up in a way.
Dude, I can't believe that you just said this, because I've been, you know, really talking about that interpretation with some friends. And what I realized is that on like a really mystical level, that of course, you know, I could say this, but you got to meditate and do this for yourself to see if you resonate with this, is think about this. Okay, there's the tree of life. The tree of immortal life, and there's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now let's think about this. This tree has both. So good is always attached to evil.
Right.
And good and evil has nothing to do with God or eternal life. People don't really think about how profound this message is, that like God is the totality, and that good and evil is the byproduct of the human mind or self-awareness not having a direct communion to that oneness. And what I've realized, and like if you get into like a Gnosticism and like more like esoteric Christianity, you'll realize that it's not that evil or good is actually good or evil. And it's not actually that good and evil are actually a problem. It's the fact that through that snake, we just didn't immediately embody the truth. So the very fact that it had to be questioned, that was the problem. You see, that's the whole paradox.
That what was questioned?
Whether you want to bite the fruit. Now, here's the paradox. If Adam or Eve would have just done it with never being asked, you see, that wouldn't have been the problem.
Yeah.
It's the very fact that they didn't have that immediate connection to God, and that they had to ask it as a question. So that's part of the deeper esoteric moral of that story, is that good and evil, it's, yes, this exists, that there's a certain relativity where this is important, but really...
I mean, just to be fair, I think it is really important because, you know, putting up with evil behavior, you know, whether you would consider it evil or not, you know, is going to do harm to you and those around you.
No, definitely. So good and evil are very, very important, but to understand, well, why do they coexist? Like, why don't we just have like a utopia world, and why isn't the world like completely hell? Why do we still have signs of hope of great things happening? Well, somehow good and evil are battling in the same arena.
Definitely.
And, you know...
when they both exist inside of us at all times.
They do.
That kind of goes back to, just to, I guess, bring it full circle here as we kind of wrap up. But with the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, you have literally both inside of you. And you can choose really to transform into whatever you want to be.
Holy shit.
World. Yeah.
Okay. This is what you're making me realize. Good and evil are important, but to actually be good, we have to first understand their relationship, accept them both, and then we get the tree of life. Because the tree of life is the integration.
Right.
of balancing the good and evil. See, good is when good can actually balance good and evil. That's the protector archetype.
When being capable of but not doing. I mean, I think like that's what I like connecting it back to the Bible too, but like meek, have you ever heard of like the meek shall inherit the earth?
Yes.
Like that doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean like weakness. It means those. It means basically those with a firearm on their hip that choose not to use it are meek. So you have the potential to commit evil or to do great harm to people, but you're not using it.
But that's important because that gives us our free will.
Exactly.
You know, we are aware, and I think that allows us to be in our divinity, to be in the tree of life, is to be able to understand the importance of good and evil, and through our divinity, through our good, we don't act on evil.
100%.
So I think, and it's interesting how I think the point I was trying to get across is that evil as evil, isolated from understanding how it's really not us taking our responsibility for being the totality and needing to go in the collective unconsciousness to unify it. That's why we're not in God. We're not in divinity in the tree of life because we're not balancing that good and evil, you know? We're just trying to scapegoat. And that's where the more mystical, like where I was saying before, evil and good are kind of relative, like the whole understanding of how to balance and understand it breaks down if you just chase the scapegoats and you don't take the accountability to unify them so that you don't act on it. Yeah.
No, I understand it. It's hard to get to solid stuff on a lot of this super metaphysical ideas because a lot of it is subjective in how we interpret it and how we how it filters through our reality tunnel of how we're perceiving the language and all that.
It is, but you know, if you look and you read Plato and look at Socrates, you know, he was a man that was very social and democratic. And you know,
he just asked a lot of questions. Really. He
didn't know anything.
And he pissed people off by just asking, "Oh, you think you're this? Well, what is this? What do you mean by that?" And he's like, "What? Get out of here."
So, you know, I take the spirit of this in a very Socratic light so that whatever premise we're starting with, we can explore and investigate it and then kind of find, hey, maybe that's actually a little subjective and we need to mediate to get to get an agreeable understanding that I think actually shows how we traverse, you know, the thought parallels, the reality parallels, you know, and that right and wrong a lot of times, you know, and people not being able to mediate human discussion is not understanding the quote unquote rules of one thought bubble versus another, you know, and you don't want to play the rules because people don't want to learn the ideas, so we can't jam and dance.
Yeah, because it's more about like asking questions. Really, just keep asking questions and be open to discussion. And you know, like I think we agreed on probably most of what we talked about.
Definitely.
But there's going to be parts where we have different translations and different understandings, and you've got to just ask questions and be willing to explore without getting like emotionally attached to the result.
Exactly, because you know, when you like there's, you know, my you know, as someone spiritual, you know, there's a great atheist philosopher, Bertrand Russell, who his whole thing, he wrote a great series about just the history of philosophy and said, look, you got to have what's called intellectual charitability. And I love this phrase because he says, you know, you have to understand, why could something be believable? Why could something be understandable? What are the conditions that'll allow that idea to have meaning for people and what that served? And whether you believe in it or not is different from whether you can intellectually understand the idea.
Completely.
And I think that's
you have to be willing to entertain ideas without believing them. Like you have to fully like, all right, let me put this idea on for size and pretend this is real, and let me, you know, think of, and going back to Alan Moore, I think that's why his stuff is so good, because he treats all the material as if it's 100% real, and he's like, all right, I don't really believe this is true, or I don't believe with this viewpoint, but if someone did believe this viewpoint, how would they be in the world? And like, let me put that on for size.
And you know what? Russell and him are both British, so he has that intellectual charitability, so he can really become an avatar, and like Plato,
embody it.
You know, become that Socratic mouthpiece that really honestly embodies an idea.
Yeah.
And
no, I love that. Hey, thanks for coming on.
Thank you,
This was
Zach.
an awesome conversation.
It really is, to go from Alan Moore to Batman to the nature of God to, you know, exploring, you know, the thought parallels.
I feel like we still barely scratched the surface. I could definitely see you coming back on another time, man.
I would love to, and you know, I feel like it would be cool to like label this episode something, you know, like,
hit me. What's my title?
Superheroes, Archetypes, and God.
Yeah. That's it right there.
Yeah.
Did you have anything you wanted to like plug, or just anything else you wanted to say here to wrap us up at the end?
What do you mean plug?
Like websites or music?
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely. So
Twitter account.
Yeah,
Whatever.
Definitely.
Anything.
Yeah, for everyone who's just knows, you know, to tell a little bit about myself, you know, I'm a professional musician and composer. So if you want to check out my SoundCloud, it's Rishavah. That's RISHAVAH.
And I'll put a link in the description.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of the music, you know, varies from some ambient electronic stuff to some electronic progressive rock and jazz stuff. So
it's good. Definitely check it out.
Yeah, you know, some stuff that, you know, I would love, you know, to, you know, anytime, you know, we could share music, you know.
Yeah. Is that a good place to contact you, or do you have an email or a Twitter if people could reach you at or something like that?
For right now, they could do that or reach me, PM me on my Facebook. I do have an Instagram for it as well. You know, I have to, you know, I'm building it up more, but please, you know, anyone who ever wants to collaborate, you know, music for, you know, meditation, for healing vibes, for media, for all sorts of cool stuff, you know, that's the sort of stuff. So I'm honored, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
And just so everyone knows,
I'm honored to have you on.
Yeah. What's the name of your project again?
Well, I'm working on a music called Sun as the band name. I'm remixing an old album that I made years ago called Made in China, which the lyrics and the meanings of it all become more and more important as the years have gone on. So I want to like reproduce that and put that back out.
Yeah. So I just want everyone to know, just sort of as like
put a link to that.
Yeah, like as a reaction, little biop, that Zach's music is amazing, and the production value,
thanks, man.
The musicianship, the writing, the vocals. If you're into any sort of psychedelic, indie rock, really, you know, anything from like Pink Floyd or the Flaming Lips, like really just, you know, it was really sincere and authentic and ambitious. You know, a lot of music that tries to be big nowadays, it can be a little superficial, but man, you know, audience out there, please check out Zach's work. Amazing stuff.
Thank you, bro. Hey,
of course.
It.
Yeah, of course.
And now I just want to thank Shawn again for coming on, and thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, share if you like what you saw, and check his music out as well.
Thank you.
But you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.
Take care.
Awesome.